You gotta act fast. I rest all the time.
Benson is the Pietrowski. Hey, so did you get there?
It works just fine. I've got my monitor. You should be good to go. I've got
So we're down to, I don't need my go yet, I don't have it.
so
Yeah, that word Josh started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but
Did you say you had a pointer with you?
it's giving me
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, absolutely. We're all better on those. Oh, no problem. Not in time. Yes, I just did. I have an advantage, unless you guys have a better idea. I thought Ed would go first. Introduce things to me. I go to meteorologist, he goes over you know what? I forgot that. Randy told me he was going to call. I'm like, I'll just keep it. It's always fun. Cool. So we'll have you guys seated up here in your chairs to the right there. We'll just have to pop up. Yeah, let's stay at the pool, but let's not walk around. Certainly, those that are viewing. Oh, yeah, this one. If we've got time, you'll go first. You'll go second. Leader of our region, our state president, that's the minutes for 5 minutes or so. If we I do get out myself and questions.
this is too.
Yeah, I know both of you. So. Yeah, those are. How long is yours? Probably 15, 20 minutes. That's fine. That's great. Oh. Okay. Good job on reporting. Good job on emergency. Angels. There's something about it. But it was on. Well, that's all. There's like several people commenting which church on Myrtle Beach. I know this guy. He's a hard one to forget. Yes, I know he's more kids than anybody else. And my radio. We met outside. Joe installed our he's the guy still works. I know, right? Randy Webster. Nice to meet you. Paul is our communications person. She's responsible for Okay, okay, okay.
My wife,
I'm actually concerned, but I'm your thank you, sir. We met, I can't remember where, but it was you and all our children. That's what I remember. Yeah, but I'd be happy to. Yes, absolutely. Trying to take off a little bit of weight. That's great. Small. It looks like strong. Our circulation almost small. We'd be passing out up there. Thank you very much. Sure. That's your mind, our shorts. That's it. Thank you. Oh yeah, I turned everything off because I'm so fearful of going to church. I'm walking to church. Because I have the San Francisco theme song on my it's funny. So yeah, that's your wife. Okay, we'll be right back. It would make it I promise you. It's understanding. We'll start out here. I know, I can't wait. I appreciate that.
Last time you tried.
We're
I don't know what it's
dinner with my parents, so it works out good. My nephew's here, so we're going to go to actually it works out good. He's sitting at home, anybody digs that job.
Thank you.
No, he's actually working. I take work. And you're presiding, right? And you have one social distance from Ed as far as you.
Yeah, he had an excuse.
This is.
She gets around for you to do that.
Hey, Joe. What's going on, man? Good. So, I hate to say this, I got your text from Evacuation. Oh man, I don't know how to dig that. But you know what's weird? Somehow you're checking my stuff, checking my picture. This was 5 days ago. I just want to get back on the so I apologize. Should I get that straight? That's great. No, with your the text message you sent about the beach volleyball.
Oh, did I say that?
Yes, yeah. That's the one. What about the one guy at the? Yes, I'm saying he was. I think I know who you're talking about. My dad did because he follows everything. My dad lives with my mom and dad live with my wife. So he sees all of it. I'm like, yeah, I'm from It's
if you read my
I would love it. It's gonna. Oh, good. Well, with him, I just put it on the side for. Yeah, that was fun. That was fun. I feel like I really did. Yeah, oh yeah. What street do you live on? Okay, you live on the same street as Tim and Dennis. Correct. Yes. I live down Vegetation Lakes in the back. So they keep us in the back, so we'll come in. We'll talk. Okay. All right, Joe. Let me know, man. I can't wait to see that. What's that? A couple people said that. Do you just 64? Oh, okay, so you're 64 then. December of 64. Yeah. This is random.
There you go.
You're 6 feet above the ground.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Here with us in the Myrtle Beach Ward Chapel of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and those of you that are at home viewing this meeting interactively, we welcome you all. In our church, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, We consider ourselves to be all brothers and sisters because we are literally spirit children of our Father in heaven. And so I'll say welcome, brothers and sisters. It's wonderful to have you all here to learn and to have questions answered with regard to preparing for hurricanes. We are here today with the leadership of this region of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's referred to as a stake. We are in the Conway stake, and the Conway stake leadership is here seated to my right, and the meeting this evening will be under the direction of our stake president, Joseph C. Jennings. We'd like to start by having an invocation offered by Brother Brad Williams. Brother Williams.
Our most kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we're indeed grateful for this Sabbath day that we have to come in together as brothers and sisters and as a community. We're thankful for Randy and Ed being here. We're grateful for them and for their presence in our lives. We're grateful for the information that they receive and disseminate to us, and we ask that they will continue to guide them and bless them as they work to provide information for us. We're so grateful for all of our many blessings. We're grateful to be children of Thee. We're grateful for all that we've been blessed with. We ask tonight that Thou will guide the speakers, help the Spirit be with them, help them to be able to transfer the info that they need to give to us, and that we'll be able to take it, and that we'll be able to prepare and to be good citizens. We're so grateful for our Savior. We give thanks for Him and for all that He's done for us, and we know that we can't do anything in this life but without Him, and we give thanks for Him. And these things we pray for, and we do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Brother Williams. I apologize for not having introduced myself. I am Alan Clibbins. I am a member of the Leadership Council of called the High Council of the Conway, South Carolina stake, and my direct assignment is emergency preparedness. So I'm pleased to be here conducting this meeting this evening, but I'm more pleased to introduce the gentlemen that are seated to my left behind me. We have two locally renowned experts. And the first that we'll hear from tonight is Ed Pietrowski. Ed really doesn't need introduction. For those of you that know me, you know I spent a couple of decades in elected office, and I always have told Ed I'm so grateful he lives in Carolina Forest, because if he were to live in my district in Myrtle Beach, I would always be afraid he would run against me, because he would certainly win. Ed is a rock star in my view. He has been meteorologist here with WPDE for decades. I have a lengthy bio that he sent to me ahead of time, but honestly, I think we can dispense with that because we all know Ed Pietrowski. Ed, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and I turn the podium over to you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Thank you very much for coming out here today. It takes special people to come out and get prepared for a hurricane, or at least the possibility of a hurricane sometime in our lifetimes on a Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. So thank you very much for coming out and listening to Randy and I speak. And what we'll do is we'll go through the past couple of hurricane seasons. Randy's going to talk a lot about preparedness. And when we're all done, if you have any questions, feel free to ask those. If we don't know the answer, I can't speak for Randy, but for me, I'll just do what I do on TV and make it up for you. So we'll have a lot of fun with that. All right, so first up, we'll wait for Josh here. Okay, let me get back to that. There we go. I'm going to have to turn a little bit. Can you guys still hear me right here? Well, I can't get out of the picture, right? Okay, we'll get this straight. So I want to be able to see what I'm looking at. That'll help me, but this isn't working. Okay, no problem. So this is on television where we have to kind of just dance around and talk about the forecast, and it's hot and humid. We all know that. All right, here we go. Let's try that again. Okay, so what I always like to do is look a little bit back first of all and give everybody an idea of just how powerful hurricanes can be. And there are four major impacts from hurricanes. You've got the wind, of course, you've got storm surge, you've got tornadoes, and of course you've got rainfall. And as we all know with hurricanes in the past several years, it's been all about the rainfall. Hurricane Florence came through back in 2018, and it was one of the most devastating hurricanes our state has ever seen. Not because it was a powerful wind producer, but because of the tremendous amount of rain that it actually produced. And the amount of rain that falls with a tropical system is directly proportional to the speed of the system. Not the wind speed, but the actual forward speed. For all intent and purposes, Florence was just a tropical storm when it moved through our area. It took literally 24 hours for Florence to get through Horry County because it was literally moving at 2 miles per hour. And as you see there, not high wind. We didn't really have any damage, nothing significant from the actual wind associated with Florence. But it did produce a tremendous amount of rain. As you see here, Loris had nearly 2 feet of rain, which set a record for the most rainfall in our state from a single tropical system since 1950. And several records fell that year because of Hurricane Florence, not only South Carolina's all-time rainfall record, but also for North Carolina as well. And some locations in North Carolina had over 30 inches of rain. And to put that in perspective for you, in a normal year, in a full year, we get roughly 45 to 50 inches of rain. So half of our rain fell in about 2 days in South Carolina. You get that kind of rain, it's going to lead to flooding. Our rivers went to incredible levels. Records that were set just 2 years prior to Florence by Hurricane Matthew were shattered, in some cases 2 to 3 feet higher than what we had with Hurricane Matthew. You all saw the videos, you all saw the photos of the incredible destruction that that flooding actually produced. This is the Rosewood community, I believe, out near Socastee, who flooded for the 3rd time in 4 years. And some of that water got incredibly high, 6, 7, 8 feet high into some of these homes. Now you can run from the wind, but you can't hide from the water. Water gets into every nook and cranny, that water rises, and it pretty much destroys everything as it rises. Just tons and tons of water, and it takes seemingly forever for that water to recede. The hurricane goes by, and if you're not living by the Waccamaw River or the Intracoastal Waterway, for the most part, life is getting back to normal in just a couple of days. Not all the time, but after these recent hurricanes. But if you lived on some of these rivers or by the Intracoastal Waterway, it literally took months for the water to get back into the banks and for people to start to be able to recover. Something that we always tell people about is respect the barricades that are put up. They're put up for a reason because there's real danger on the other side of those barricades. When you get a tremendous amount of rain, streams are created that were never there before. Roads can be washed away. And when roads are washed away and there's water over them, you have no idea how deep that area is or how much of that road has actually been washed away. So we always tell people to turn around, don't drown. If you don't know what you're getting into, don't drive through it. And I believe, and Randy can correct me if I'm wrong here, this was a car that before they actually were able to get out and to inspect the roads to see how bad they were after Hurricane Florence, these folks were out driving and unfortunately didn't see what was beneath the water and drove into this. Luckily, nobody was seriously injured and nobody was killed in that particular case. But it's happened around the United States, and unfortunately it happens way too often because people simply don't respect those barriers, those orange cones and those orange barrels that are put up each time. In total, we had 52 deaths associated with Hurricane Florence. 40 of those were in North Carolina, 9 were in South Carolina. Put that in perspective for you, 24 of the deaths were during or around the time of the hurricane. More people actually died after the hurricane, and you can see some of the reasons why up here, from trees falling, people getting out and trying to clean up in very hot and humid conditions, electrocution. Even carbon monoxide poisoning is a big deal as well. So, once the hurricane passes, you can't let your guard down. That's why it may take a little while after evacuation for people to be able to get back into their homes. People like Randy and law enforcement and the emergency preparedness are all out there to make sure that if you're going to go home, it's going to be safe to get home. We don't want you to get hurt or even killed trying to get back home after a hurricane. So always be patient, let them do their job, and let them make sure that everybody is going to be safe getting back after a hurricane has actually passed. Unfortunately, in our area during Hurricane Florence, we had 5 fatalities. 2 were in eastern Marion County, and unfortunately that was when a county police truck, I believe, a sheriff's police van went around a barricade. And unfortunately, they went into water that swept them away, and 2 of the people they were carrying in there actually passed away. So again, respect those barriers. We had 2 in Longs who died of carbon monoxide poisoning. I think they started their generator in their actual mobile home. And as you all know, that is the worst thing you can do, not even in your garage. You want to put that generator outside if you're going to start it and let it vent outside, because it can actually kill you, and it's a silent killer. And then in western Georgetown County, we had one person who was killed who was driving on the road, went into a culvert and didn't realize how deep that water was, and the water washed them off the road. And unfortunately, that person was found the next day and had passed away. So your life can change in a moment. Your life can end in a moment. And I'm not trying to be dramatic here, but if you're not doing the right thing during hurricanes or tornadoes, bad things can happen to people. So you need to be responsible and think about not only you, but your family as well. Do the right thing and take it easy out there. So Hurricane Michael was also in 2018. Hurricane Florence, the calling card for that hurricane was, of course, the flooding rain. Hurricane Michael was another beast of a hurricane. This one was all about the wind. So Florence, flooding rainfall, as you'll see with Hurricane Michael, this was all about incredible wind. In this particular video that was taken near Mexico Beach on the panhandle of Florida, that's how fast the wind was blowing. You can see how strong the wind is. There was heavy rain there as well, but they didn't have any flooding from the heavy rain. They had 5 or 6 inches of rain because Michael, even though it was very powerful, was moving very quickly. So it wasn't the flooding rain. The flooding you're going to see here, you can see some of the wind damage being done, but the flooding that you'll see here is actually storm surge flooding. This is flooding from the Gulf of Mexico being pushed by the wind actually ashore. And it becomes a huge battering ram. It basically, that water is a very powerful force. It breaks down things, homes, buildings, whatever it may be, and then that stuff becomes battering rams and runs into other things, and it basically destroys just about everything in its path. It was almost like a 30-mile wide tornado came ashore in Mexico Beach. That's a big fear, don't get me wrong. This has happened in South Carolina before when Hurricane Hugo came through, and nobody here is probably old enough to remember Hurricane Hazel back in 1954, right? Nobody? I made some friends with that comment, I'm sure. Okay. But there you can see how devastating the storm surge is. That is doesn't have anything to do really with the wind so much as it does the wind pushing that wall of water ashore, and that water being so powerful that it does a tremendous amount of damage. So again, storm surge is a big deal, wind is a big deal, rainfall is a big deal, and of course tornadoes as well. All right, understanding storm surge. You often hear us talk about storm surge. This is only a problem if you really live right near the coast. And when evacuation orders are given because that's a real possibility, the ocean getting to where you are. Evacuations are not ordered because of the wind. It has everything to do with the water, okay? So when it comes to the wind, you have to assess your own situation wherever you are if you're outside of the evacuation zone. Do you have a lot of trees around? Are those trees susceptible to coming down in high wind? Those are things you'll need to think about. But when it comes to storm surge, it's always the forecast of the water above ground level. Where you're standing, how high will that water actually get? And you can see up here some of the hurricanes we've had recently, and even Hurricane Hugo. And really, Hurricane Hugo is the beast of the hurricanes. There's no question for the Grand Strand. That's the big one outside of Hurricane Hazel, of course, back in 1954. But storm surge up and down the Grand Strand was roughly 9 to 15 feet with Hurricane Hugo. Think about that, 9 to 15 feet. Now, on top of that rise in water, you have massive waves. They're debris filled, causing all sorts of damage and producing a catastrophe for those parts of the coast. We even had issues with Hurricane Matthew, obviously. We had quite a bit of destruction, especially on the south end of the Grand Strand. Hurricane Isaias did some damage last year, especially up near the Cherry Grove and Little River communities. That was a developing hurricane that came ashore, and the way Horry County kind of curves, the water was pushed ashore there, and there were quite a few, a couple hundred cars that were severely damaged or even destroyed because of the water getting to where they were. So again, something you have to think about if you live by the coast. And of course, Hurricane Dorian was less than that. All right, this is a look at Hurricane Hugo's storm surge, and those of you who've been here a while know that, in particular, north of Charleston, near McClellanville and Bulls Bay, was particularly hard hit by Hurricane Hugo. And in this particular case, the storm surge was 20 feet, still on record, I believe, as the highest storm surge for the east coast of the United States. Because Hugo was moving so fast and it was a parallel or direct hit on the South Carolina coast. Very rarely do we have those direct hits. Most of the time they're starting that recurvature along the coast and they kind of brush our coast. Like Isaias and of course Dorian, they were paralleling our coast as they moved up the eastern seaboard. They could still cause a lot of damage, and you can get a lot of rain and a lot of wind, But that more direct hit is always going to be worse for any part of the coastline because it literally is pushing the ocean even farther inland, more force with the actual ocean. So with Hurricane Dorian, this was a couple of years ago, this is what the radar looked like, and you can clearly see the eye. We got kind of lucky because the eye hooked out to the right just a bit before coming up the Grand Strand, so we were outside of what we call the eye wall. The eye is the clear part where the weather's pretty nice overall. The problem is, to get to the eye, you've got to go through the eye wall. That's the most vicious part of the hurricane. It has the most rain, it has the most wind, and does more damage than any other part of the hurricane. Okay? That's not to say all the damage happens there. Hurricanes can be 500 miles wide. Impacts are often felt far from the center. So even though this hurricane moved off the coast, the eye did, we still got a lot of wind, we still got a lot of rain, and there was damage with Hurricane Dorian. Not as bad as it could have been if the eye had come right over us. This is some of the storm surge flooding. Again, the ocean coming ashore down in Debadew, if you're familiar with that, down on the south end of the Grand Strand, not far from Pawleys Island. It didn't take a whole lot of water to infiltrate that community, with water coming over the dunes, coming through the homes and into the street. And that was a pretty minimal storm surge compared to what could happen with some of the bigger hurricanes. So it's very scary to think about some of these homes that are right on the beach, what they're going to look like when a significant hurricane comes through with a big storm surge. And quite frankly, Matthew was a pretty significant storm surge, but when you think of another Hugo, history repeats itself when it comes to weather. It may be this year, it may be 50 years from now that we get another Hugo or a Hazel. But it will happen, and it's going to be worse than when we had the last two because we've built so much more near the coast these days. Another aspect of a hurricane are tornadoes. And I don't know if any of you saw our coverage on Thursday morning of Tropical Storm Elsa, just a little tropical storm coming through, but we must have been on air for 2 hours because we had 4 tornado warnings issued for the area, and every one of those need to be taken seriously. They were Doppler indicated tornadoes, indicating there was sufficient rotation to create a tornado, but thankfully, after the surveys were done, there does not appear to have been any tornadoes that actually touched down, at least that we could see. So that was good, but it doesn't have to be a tornado to cause damage. If you have strong thunderstorm winds, that can cause just as much damage as an actual tornado, but people like to say they've been in a tornado rather than a thunderstorm a lot of times. So everybody thinks that they've been in a tornado whenever there's actual damage. But that was a tornado in a hurricane. They're usually spinning up very quickly, and they spin down very quickly. They may only be on the ground for about a minute, minute and a half. But in that minute or minute and a half, if it's right over your neighborhood, it can cause a whole lot of damage in a short amount of time. So you've got to take those tornado warnings seriously as well. And the good news is, I think everybody here, how many of you have cell phones? Mobile phones? 40 years ago, nobody would have said that, but obviously. But the most important thing to do is download an app that will notify if you get a tornado warning. Because if your address falls within the polygon, the tornado warning, you'll get alerted no matter what time of the day it is. And it's a great thing. I mean, obviously I would plug our app, but any app out there is probably going to do a good job at alerting you of a possibility of a tornado. Again, if you're in the warning, your phone will buzz and it will wake you up. And with us, you turn on the TV, and typically we're on the air because we have a pretty good idea when there may be tornadoes around, so we're always in the office to make sure of that. Hurricane Dorian produced a lot of rainfall as well, but the amount of flooding you're going to get is often based on what's happening before the hurricane gets here. How wet have you been? How dry have you been? And with Hurricane Dorian, we were pretty lucky that it was dry as Dorian came through, so we didn't have a tremendous amount of flooding with Hurricane Dorian. And quite honestly, we are close to a drought. We were in a drought for a while. We were slowly coming out of it. So Elsa's rainfall has completely taken us out of the drought now, but we actually needed that rainfall. Probably not that quickly, but we needed that, so we're probably back to normal here when it comes to rainfall. Peak wind gusts with Hurricane Dorian. Again, the core of the hurricane was just off the coast, and for that reason, we had wind gusts in the 40s inland and generally in the 50s and 60s right along the immediate coast. Then last year, how many of you remember Hurricane Isaias? I could not get that pronunciation of that name right to save my life. I just couldn't. I could say it fluently now. Of course, it's not, because it will never come up again, probably. But it made landfall in Ocean Isle. You'll often hear meteorologists talk about the right front quadrant of the hurricane being the worst. If you're going to be in a hurricane, you always want to be on the west side. It's the weaker side of the hurricane often. And it's because of the storm motion and how the northeast quadrant actually is rotating and moving with the storm motion itself. So the winds are actually stronger in the northeast corner. So this was the actual track of Hurricane Isaias. And you can see on the west side, We had wind gusts on the Grand Strand in the 50s, but literally 20 to 30 miles away on the other side of the track. Look at those tremendous wind gusts. 70s, 80s, and even up into the 90s. So in other words, Isaias, if it had gone about 20 to 30 miles west, we would have had a tremendous amount of destruction in our area like they had in Ocean Isle. Now try to nail down a hurricane within 20 miles of a point 5 days out. It's impossible to do. That's why there's that massive cone that you see when we put out a 5-day forecast. The National Hurricane Center, you know, people like me, I've been doing this for almost 30 years now. Randy's doing it longer than I have. But we still rely on those guys and gals that work down there. They have tremendous experience. They know more about hurricanes than anybody. They put those forecasts out there, and it's my job and Randy's job to take their forecast and relate it to you and how you can prepare best for the impacts that are most likely in our area. We're not making up our own forecast because those guys and gals are a lot smarter than we are when it comes to hurricanes. They've devoted their entire life to that. But again, that was the actual track of Isaias, and we got pretty lucky overall because again, 20, 30 miles to the west, we would have been in a lot more trouble. This was some of the storm surge flooding in Garden City. Now, for those of you who've been here a long time, you can literally spit and it floods in Garden City a lot of times, especially in the winter when you have a northeasterly wind. But storm surge flooding, it doesn't take a whole lot to create some issues along the immediate coast. So that was some of the flooding that was done during Hurricane Isaias in Garden City. And you never want to see the ocean coming into your pool, never a good thing. And that's what was happening in some of the hotels down in Garden City as well. And you know, you look at that and go, well, that's not me. I live far enough away. I would never own a hotel, but we all end up paying for it. You know, some form or fashion, we're all going to end up paying for that kind of stuff. So it's, you know, it's a huge community effort to make sure that everybody's on the same page and doing their very best to protect themselves and their properties from hurricanes and tropical storms, and of course, all sorts of tropical depressions. So Elsa came through just a couple of days ago, and it was much needed rainfall. We had roughly 2 to 4 inches of rain across the area. A few locations had up to 5. And the wind gust, when the thunderstorms were rolling through in the morning, we had a couple of wind gusts that were in the 50s. But overall, the damage was very minor. We didn't have a tremendous amount of power outages. So if you're going to have a tropical system in any given year, these are the kind to have. And we have a long way to go, though. There's no question about that. I'm going to get into that here in just a second. I want to quickly look back at the historic season of 2020. There's your bowl of spaghetti for the night, right there. So we had 30 named storms last year, which shattered the record. The average season, 12 named storms, 6 of those becoming hurricanes, and 3 of those actually becoming major hurricane. A major hurricane is one that is a category 3. It's 111 mile per hour winds, or actually higher than that. So it was incredible. Very, very busy. Some of the records that were set include 2020 had the most named storms, beating 2005 that had 28 named storms. Second when it came to major hurricanes and hurricanes, but the only statistic that matters is whether or not you get hit. And last year we set a record, shattered the record for the most landfalling tropical storms and hurricanes in any given season. We had 12 of those. These are all the different landfalls. Particularly hard hit was the state of Louisiana. They had 5 different tropical storms and hurricanes actually hit them, including 2 Category 2 storms and a Category 4 hurricane on top of 2 tropical storms as well. Overall, we fared pretty well. Early in the season, we had a very quickly developing tropical storm that came ashore, didn't really do anything. And then we had, of course, Hurricane Isaias, and that was it for us. If you had told me we were going to have 30 named storms and Isaias was going to be it, I would be thrilled with that. You just never know in any given year whether you're going to get hit or not. This was a closer look at the Gulf of Mexico in their big bowl of spaghetti with all the hurricanes that came ashore. And of course you can see Laura there that made landfall in Louisiana. So last year we actually got through the alphabet. And when we say the alphabet, I think there's 26 letters in the alphabet. How do I not know that? But we only have 21 names. And the reason is we don't use Q, U, X, Y, and Z. For the most part, in America, we probably can come up with a lot of names, but it's not just American, but Spanish and French names that are used as well, because countries that are impacted by hurricanes often speak French or Spanish. They try to use names that those people are familiar with. And in those cultures and in those languages, there's not many Q, U, X, Y, and Z names, so we don't use those. So when we get to the end of the list, typically we go on to what you see here, the Greek alphabet. The problem was this year is in the Greek alphabet, we had some pretty big storms. How do you actually retire a Greek alphabet? You really can't. What they do is they'll say Alpha 2020 has been retired. Then we'll go on to Alpha 2021. They thought that was quite confusing. So this year, there's actually going to be a second list of names now. Let's pray to the good Lord that we don't get to the second list. That would be wonderful. But the first list, as you see here, we're through Elsa now. And that was the fastest start to a hurricane season on record, faster than even last year. Although the conditions out there this year are not nearly as ripe as what we had last year, so that's good news. But you can see we'll start the second list once we get past the first 21 names if we get that far. All right, the official forecast. By the way, you probably noticed the averages changed. It was 12, 6, and 3 for 2020. For 2021, it's a new 30-year average, and over the last 30 years, we've averaged 14 named storms in a season, 7 becoming hurricanes, and 3 of those becoming major hurricanes. The forecast for this year, and this does include the 5 tropical storms and 1 hurricane we've had already, is for 20 named storms, 9 of those becoming hurricanes, and 4 of those becoming major hurricanes. So we've got a long, long way to go. July is typically pretty quiet for us, and when I put that forecast up, I always tell everybody it doesn't matter how many storms you get in a given year, whether it's 25 named storms or 5 named storms. It only matters if you get hit. That is the bottom line. In any given year, you don't know if you're going to get hit. Those forecasts that are put out there give you numbers. They say nothing about where those tropical storms and hurricanes are going to go. As I mentioned, we don't know that with any certainty till maybe 3 days out. 5 or 6 days out, we might know, it could be a threat. That's why the forecasts don't go beyond 5 days, because they get so wildly all over the place beyond 5 days. 7 days from right now, there could be a model that shows the hurricane hitting Bermuda, and literally 7 days later, it's making landfall in Mexico. Small errors in the forecast models on day 1 become massive errors by the time you get to day 5 and 7. So that's why they only do a 5-day forecast right now. So back in 2010, we had 19 named storms, but not a single hurricane actually hit the United States. Very lucky. But 1983, we only had 4 named storms that entire year, but Galveston got hit by a Category 3 hurricane. So you just never know. Also in 1992, a lot of you probably remember hearing the name Hurricane Andrew. That was a Category 5 hurricane. We've only had 4 hit the U.S. And in that year, there were only 7 named storms. So you just never know in any given year. That's why it's so important to prepare every year. If you're over-prepared, that's great. Nobody's ever over-prepared and said, gosh, I wish I prepared less. It usually goes the other way, right? Okay, so this season, why will it be busier than normal? This is what you want is an El Nino. El Nino is the warming of the waters off the South American coast, and when that happens, it creates more thunderstorms, it creates more wind shear across the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean Sea, and the Atlantic Ocean. So when you have wind shear, it doesn't matter how warm the water is, it causes thunderstorms to tilt, and they collapse on themselves. So it helps destroy tropical depressions, storms, and hurricanes that are trying to form. Unfortunately, we are actually on borderline La Nina again this year. Not as obvious as last year, but in La Nina, the waters are cooler off the South American coast, means fewer thunderstorms, which reduces wind shear. And if you have plenty of warm water out there, now you have almost pristine conditions for tropical storms and hurricanes to actually form. And that's basically the reason that we think that we'll have an active season. Waters are not as warm as they were last year. A lot of the blue that you see here, right in through here, is water that's below normal for this time of the year. It's still warm water, but instead of maybe 84, 85, 86, maybe it's around 79, 80, 81. And that's all helpful because the less fuel you have for hurricanes, the better off. Right in through here between the Lesser Antilles and Africa is what we call the MDR. It's the main development region. That's where most of the big time hurricanes actually form. These waves come off the African coast, they develop, and they have a week and a half to cross the Atlantic and gain energy and then eventually impact land at some point. Not all hurricanes come from Africa. A lot of people think that. Hurricane Hazel actually started in the Eastern Caribbean as just a wave of low pressure. Next thing you know, it's moving north, and it made landfall in Little River as a Category 4 with 140 mile per hour winds on October 15th of 1954. So was not an African wave at all. Right now, our water temperature is at 83 degrees right along the coast, and it's kind of been up and down. Last year at this time, we were about 86 or 87, so we're actually running a little bit cooler than last year. So every little bit actually helps when it comes to reducing hurricane activity. So right now, we're completely quiet in the tropics, and I know we're talking about a very active hurricane season, but I think we're going to be pretty quiet here for the next 7 to 10 days, and there are 2 primary reasons why. Number one, over Africa, you have a huge desert, right? The Sahara Desert. North of the Sahara Desert in Europe, you get these massive high pressures this time of the year, and the circulation around that, high pressures up here, circulation around that sends very strong winds across the Sahara Desert. And a lot of that dirt and dust gets shot into the Atlantic Ocean, and the upper level easterly winds carry that dry, dusty air across the Atlantic Ocean. Dry, dusty air does two things. Number one, it helps to dry out the atmosphere. That's good because if you don't have thunderstorms forming, they're less likely to form into a tropical depression or storm or hurricane. Secondly, when you have a lot of dust, it actually blocks the sunlight. It blocks the sunlight enough that the ocean actually cools a little bit. So we're going to see how much cooling is going to take place over the next 1 to 2 weeks as we head into the peak of hurricane season. So those two factors are very good. And now we're going to really nerd it up for you. This is what we call the Madden-Julian oscillation. This is an atmospheric wave that travels around the globe every 30 to 60 days. And it has two phases to it, a suppressive stage and an enhanced stage. In the enhanced stage, it forces the air to rise, meaning more thunderstorms. And then, of course, those thunderstorms can organize and become storms and hurricanes. What we're going to see over the next week and a half to 2 weeks is what we call the suppressed stage. That's where the air is actually sinking throughout much of the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico. So between the sinking air, the dry air, and a cooler ocean, we think we're in pretty good shape for the next 7 to 14 days. No guarantee, nothing ever is in weather, right? But that's the way it looks right now, that we may go through a fairly active or a fairly quiet period here for the next 2 weeks before things ramp up. And the reason I say before they ramp up, the historical peak of hurricane season is that time frame right there between August 20th and October 10th. As you see, 53% of tropical storms form, but what really matters is this number right here. 73, nearly 3/4 of all the Category 3 or higher hurricanes that form in the Atlantic hurricane season occur during that time period. And if you really think about South Carolina's history, the historical peak of hurricane season is September 10th. Just about every major hurricane that we've ever had, and I shouldn't say major, I should say significant hurricane, because they're not all Category 3, some have been Category 1s, have actually occurred after that date on September 10th, including Florence, Floyd back in '99, Hugo, Matthew. There was even a hurricane that made landfall in Garden City on Halloween of 1899. Pretty scary to think about that, right? A couple of other graphics I'll show you before I turn it over to Randy here. Always stay vigilant. No matter what we're telling you in a forecast, you'll never hear me say guaranteed. I'll have higher confidence or lower confidence in a forecast, but I'm never going to guarantee anything because things can change, especially when it comes to weather. For example, every one of the Category 4 or 5 hurricanes that have hit the United States, those 4 that you see there were just tropical storms 3 days prior to making landfall. So, you're 3 days out and you're like, oh, it's just going to be a tropical storm coming ashore, and you don't watch, what happens? All of a sudden you have a Category 5 coming ashore, people panic and are not prepared. People get on the road, they're trapped on the road when the hurricane comes ashore, and that's one of our biggest fears, is people wait too late, they're trapped on the roads trying to evacuate when a hurricane is coming. So stay vigilant because things do change, and always remember to prepare one category higher than what's actually being forecast. And it goes back to you'd much rather over-prepare than under-prepare. Makes a huge difference. All right, and don't take Category 1 hurricanes lightly. Randy and I worry about Category 4s and 5s. Most people do a good job of saying, I'm not sticking around, I'm getting out of here for those. A lot of people take their chances with 1s, 2s, and 3s in particular. And they may not prepare like they're supposed to, but these statistics should open your eyes to the fact that Category 1 hurricanes kill, and they do a tremendous amount of damage as well. So remember that. Take every hurricane seriously. And then we'll end with just a couple of pictures here, a couple of movies. This is flying through the eye of a hurricane. There's the eye wall, and then bam, there's the actual eye. The men and women who fly through hurricanes are very brave, but it's also very safe. They've been doing this for a long time, and in more than 50 years, there's not been a single plane actually crash. One almost did during Hurricane Hugo, north of Puerto Rico, but they were able to save that flight, and everybody on board was fine. I want to show that to you one more time because I think it's a cool thing. So they can't see 2 feet in front of them because they're in the eye wall. And then when they break through the eye wall, you see the actual circular nature of the eye wall and the blue sky where the eye is actually located. So that's pretty cool. Now this video was shot with a gimbal, so it's very steady, but not this one. This is what it looks like to be the pilot of a hurricane hunter. A lot of bumping, whole lots of turbulence there, but they do a tremendous job and give us very valuable information to help us better forecast where the storm is going to go and what the impacts will be. hurricane hunters are so good that if they can reduce the watch or the warning for a coastline by 1 mile, for every mile that they reduce that watch or warning because of a better forecast, it saves a community, I think, around $1 million. So they're very valuable. Your tax dollars are paying for that, but it's money well invested when it comes to that. All right. So be prepared. That's the bottom line. And for that preparation, I'm going to, are you going to introduce Randy? You want me to just have, okay. All right, so Alan's going to come back up and introduce Randy, and we'll entertain questions at the end of the time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ed. For those of you, I know that you have questions that you'd like to have answered. Following our next speaker's remarks, we will open the meeting to question and answer for our two experts with us this evening. So I'd ask you to take out a pen or take out your cell phone and note the following phone number to which you can text any question that you might have. All right, you ready? That phone number is 843-995-1421. 843-995-1421. So next, we get to hear from somebody I've had the pleasure to work with for 3 decades, Randy Webster. Randy, you may know that name. I think most of us have certainly heard the name if you've not had direct dealings with Randy. Randy has been in public safety for 37 years. 32 of those years have been right here in Horry County, with most of it being in the emergency management division and managing at the top of the emergency management division. Now, if any of you have ever had the opportunity during an emergency event to be at the Horry County emergency management offices during an event, it is really a sight to behold, with representatives there from every level of county government, public safety from across the area, the Red Cross, volunteer agencies, all there assembled together to work together and correlate any emergency response that should arise. And the person holding the baton is Randy Webster. Randy, just 2 years ago, was promoted to Deputy County Administrator for Public Safety. So he manages all of public safety at the county level here in Horry County, but he retains his responsibility in managing the emergency management division. So without further ado, Randy, we welcome you to the podium. Thank you for being here with us.
Hey everybody, thank you for allowing us to be here tonight. And this is one of the most enjoyable things I get to do of all the things I do on a daily basis, just to be able to come out and talk with everybody, get feedback, interaction. As Ed mentioned, we'll have time for questions after this, and that's the most enjoyable part for me, is to get answers for you. Hopefully, as Ed said, I didn't mean it that way. Ed said, like Ed was mentioning, that we'll get you some answers as best we can, and we'll do the best we can to make sure you get what you need. So once again, thank you. Some of the information I'm going to share with you, Ed has done, and this is also the first time he and I have been back together doing this since the pandemic started. So this is special for us too, because we both get a real joy out of doing this. So thank you again for giving us this opportunity. All right, so let's see if we can back up a little bit. Oh, you're good. You're good. You're right on. Okay, so Ed mentioned the information about the storms, what you need to understand about the storms. What I want to talk to you tonight is now what you do with that information. So Ed will give you all the information you need to know about the storm is coming, the intensity levels, timing, wind speeds, and all that. What does that mean to you? What does that mean to your family, to your friends, to your neighbors? It means it's time to get ready. But is that the time to get ready? You should be getting ready now, especially since we just had Elsa come through as a good wake-up call. So preparedness is a 24/7, 365 days a year issue. because it's not just hurricanes. We have other events that happen in our area every single day, not just wind from hurricanes or tornadoes or flooding. We have wildfires, we have snowstorms, we have ice storms. So every season we have something, and no matter what happens during all those events, they all seem to lead to a few common issues. Basically, you might lose power for days on end. So just stop and think about it. Do you have everything you need right now if we were without power for the next 3 or 4 days? In July. Hot. Yeah, keep that in mind. So that's what I want you to try to understand now. What I'm going to work you through is what you do with the information, what's best for you, and we can't hit it all tonight, but we're going to hit as much as we can. So Ed mentioned that part. So let's talk about what you do before the storm. Now's the time to make your emergency kit. And we'll give you a graphic in just a second of an idea of what's in a kit. But the thing about it is what's in your kit, not the kit that I can make up for you. You have things that you may need that others might not. So think about it in common terms. If the power went out for the next 3 days, what do you have handy that you can grab to easily to get through that outside of an air conditioner? Do you have adequate canned foods on, non-perishable food items on hand? Do you have a means to open those that does not require electricity? Do you have enough water on hand in case you can't get water flowing for whatever reason? Storms do cause upheaval of trees, which ultimately can upheaval water lines. So keep that in mind. So think about an emergency kit. If I could not have electricity or did not have access to the things I use on a daily basis, I need to have that somewhere where I can get to it, at least at a minimal supply, and something that you need to constantly refresh every 4 or 5 months. Water doesn't last forever in those plastic bottles. Usually about every 6 months you need to rotate that out. So just think about that. Medications, food for your kids, food for your elderly parents, friends, neighbors, and let's talk about pets. Who's responsible for your pet? Is it me? No. Pets are another issue. Make sure you've got plenty of supplies on hand for your pets. And we'll talk a little more about that in just a second. So here's an idea to things to put in your emergency kit. This kit can be as much as you want it to be or as little as you want it to be, but at least have something. And the list can go on and on and on. It's whatever you need it to be to help you and your family to get through those next few days. Flashlights with batteries. Let me tell you a few things not to do. It'd be a lot easier. Do not try to use candles, open flame, anything like that for light. Inevitably they can cause fires, things like that. Make sure you, one little trick, if you happen to evacuate, I'm jumping ahead just a bit, but it's a good time to talk about it. And you left your house, you're coming back 4 or 5 days later, you don't know if the power's on when you get home, but you don't know if it was off in between. One little trick you can do before you leave is take a cup of ice, just put it in your freezer, and when you come back, if that's still cubed ice, you're good to go. If it's come back and it's solid, that means it melted and refroze, so everything you had in there now is probably bad. So there's a little trick like that. There we go. All right, decision timeline. Let's talk about that. So Ed mentioned you've got the storm, everything's coming in our direction. It's 5 days out. We're just now getting into that air cone. And we'll just walk through what we just did with Elsa because it's fresh in everybody's mind. There was a point in time where South Carolina was not in that 5-day air cone. What we're doing at that point in time is monitoring, watching it, already having conference calls with all of our local agencies, city agencies, county agencies, state agencies, federal partners, and we're also having conference calls with a lot of different folks just to get everybody on the same page. And that's the time for you to do the same thing with your family and friends. Get everybody on the same page. Hey, you know it's out there. Let's think about what we would need to do if it's going to come our direction. Don't worry at that point if it's a tropical storm or a hurricane in the forecast. Just know there's something that might be coming in our direction and start thinking about it and get everybody talking together, idea what you're going to do. Then as the storm, the 5-day air cone eventually did get to us, and it was showing a tropical system or tropical storm at that time 5 days out. As Ed mentioned, that air or that track inside that air cone is actually just tracking the center of circulation. That's not the storm. That's just the center of circulation. We start sending out our updates to the folks that we work with. I send that out, I talk about that, but I also send out the graphics that show what's the expected wind field supposed to look like. When's the arrival of these tropical storm force winds supposed to get here? Tropical storm force winds being 39 miles or higher. When Elsa was showing it us 5 days out with the air cone, it was 3 days out, we were going to get tropical storm force winds in our area. So it was 2 days there, we kind of just don't even take off the table because it's already going to be here. The effects of it were going to be here. So don't get fixated on that air cone and on that track, because the air is on both sides of that track. That is just the center of the storm. Storms could be several hundred miles wide. Wind field can be several hundred miles wide from that center of circulation. That's what we're trying to make sure we're preparing for. That's what's going to be under the situation when we start talking about evacuations, is the arrival of that tropical storm force wind. So that information is always out there. Ed talks about it, as well as others. Is when can we expect conditions to potentially start deteriorating in our area? How many days out do we have? So monitor the forecast before the storm. Prepare your home or business. Any idea what you can do to prepare your home? Think of some things. Simple things. Just make sure that you have all your things that would blow away in the wind or other issues that packed away, pulled away, stacked away someplace neatly out of the way of the wind that could pick it up and blow it into your house or into the neighbors. If you have the ability to put shutters on your windows, excellent thing to do. Just think common sense stuff. That's all this is. It's really common sense stuff. How do I get through this so when I come out of the other end of this thing, I don't have as much damage as I could have had I not taken those steps. Charging devices. Everybody's got cell phones, iPads, all the good stuff now, and they're only as good as long as they're charged, right? So make sure you've got a means to be able to charge your information devices for the long haul. There's like little batteries you can get that you can attach to those. And there are innovative ways, if we lost power for a number of days, if you have a car charger for your cell phone and your car is fine, there's a way to keep your cell phone charged up. Things like that. So think about, it's real easy when the anxiety starts kicking in and these storms are starting to threaten us to not think about the common things you do every single day as a possible solution. So little things like that will help you get through it. Follow credible sources for information. I can't stress that enough. Ed and I spend a lot of time trying to curtail rumors or false forecasts. I know it's a huge headache for him on that front. It's a huge headache for us on that front as well, because people are starting to make decisions on that information. And there's been a few times in the past we've had some of the national social media types talk about what's going to happen on these events that are coming our way, and it couldn't be further from the truth, but people are making decisions on that false information. And that gets a lot of people in trouble. Locally, I will tell you, Ed is on target every single time. The others are well too. And I watch that because if it starts getting off key, we both follow National Hurricane Center forecast. There are a few outside of our market that try to forecast it on their own, and that's not accurate, not a good way to go. We all need to be on the same page. And as soon as we see it, we start going after it to get it stopped, because it's not what needs to happen. People need to make decisions on the best, most accurate information. And it's information that we should all be sharing as long as it's truthful information and accurate and up to date. The last bullet there, be patient and be flexible. These are stressful times, and try to keep that in mind. It's easy for tempers to get in the way of good decision making. It's easy for anxiety level to increase and get in the way of good decision making. It'll be okay. End of the day, it will be okay. It will be different, but it'll be okay. We have not had a direct impact here really of any significance since Hazel and Hugo. Of all the named storms that we've had, most recently even outside of the flooding piece, but the actual event of the storm itself, we've not seen. Is anybody here new in the last year or two to our area? Okay. I will tell you this. If you were here during Hazel, you were here during Hugo, you can wear the t-shirt that you survived a hurricane. You don't need the t-shirt on the other ones. Okay? It's easy to say, oh yeah, Hurricane Florence, look how bad it was, Category 4 storm. It was at some point somewhere, not here. So if you look around, we have been blessed that the last few major hurricanes that we've had, we've almost been back to normal within the next 24 hours. But what happened down at New Mexico Beach, Florida? That wasn't 24 hours later. They're still trying to get put back together down there. Hurricane Katrina, and all these years later, there are still communities down there that may never come back, still trying to get themselves put together. I will promise you one thing, that if we do take a direct hit of a large hurricane, or Myrtle Beach, Horry County, all of our area is a direct landfall, it will definitely look different the next morning. It will. It's going to take all of us to come together to get it pieced back together. But I will promise you this, it will be okay. We'll make it through it. I have not seen these other communities that have gone through these things fold up, roll up the carpet, and go away and never come back. It'll be different, but we'll make it. We'll get through it. But we only do it together. Only do it together. Let's talk about evacuations. What does that mean? So the evacuations are ordered by the governor of South Carolina. That's who actually makes the call. We do our recommendations based upon the situation that we understand from the Hurricane Center forecast. Why are we doing evacuations? Ed mentioned the fact it's about the storm surge. It's not the wind. So we're trying to get people out of harm's way when that devastating storm surge comes on land from the ocean. And in some cases, especially in the southern part of the county, Garden City area, or Socastee in particular, Bucksport on that side of the Waccamaw, the storm surge may come up Winyaw Bay out of Georgetown and actually push in on the backside. So that's what happens as well. So storm surge comes from very different avenues. So how do we understand? Through different modeling from the Corps of Engineers, FEMA, and others, kind of gives us an idea of what the storm surge impacts might be on any given storm. But you can't run that every single time and say, okay, only these neighborhoods need to move. So we've come up with the storm surge or evacuation zones. A, B, and C. Everybody should be familiar with that. In some areas around, I know us in Myrtle Beach are doing it, you'll see little signs that says evacuation zone A or B, in some cases C. And that's basically where the borders are. Zone A is pretty much from the ocean to 17 business. B is from 17 business to the waterway, and C is on the other side of the waterway to Highway 31. Some areas, as you can tell in the north end, there is not a B. B is basically here in Myrtle Beach and on south towards Garden City, rolls in it, just because of how the land is and how much land there is to deal with. Now, there's a couple of common sense things about this too. Anybody drive over 501 Bridge and look and see the waterway way down there and the high walls on both sides of the intercoastal or over here at Robert Grissom? And you scratch your head and say, how could we be in a storm surge though? Yeah, that's true. But if you go north toward Little River and you cross that bridge, the water's right there. Same if you get in Socastee on south, the water's right there. So we do have topography to deal with. So these storm surge zones are made up as a means to help keep it simple. So that's why highways are used or waterways are used to set up these boundaries. I will tell you this, there is, going back to the common sense approach, it's kind of tough to say, hey, you live in Carolina Forest or in the Myrtle Beach area where your topography, you're 10, 15, 20 feet above sea level or maybe 30 feet above, and you're going to be in storm surge. So we're actually going to be reworking these in the next few years, kind of pull them back a little bit, make a little better sense, because we don't need to evacuate people that don't need to evacuate for the storm surge. Now, saying that, if you live in one of these zones, even today, governor orders the mandatory evacuation. It is mandatory. Now, what does mandatory mean? Mandatory means mandatory. You're supposed to go. You're supposed to leave that zone. And how far are you supposed to go? Technically, just outside of the zone. That's the area that's going to be impacted by the storm surge. But there's other issues to deal with. You still have high wind, flooding, trees may come down. So you got to think about it. Where do I need to go if I'm going to evacuate? Do I just evacuate to, outside the zone, maybe to Conway? That's a good idea, but you still got to contend with everything else. Or is it a good time to go visit friends in some other place? How far? A lot of people go to, Columbia, Charlotte, Oklahoma, wherever they feel like they need to go, So, and I advocate that. Because you got to think about, do you really want to be here when all this is going on? Absolutely not. So it's just going to be a tough time when it happens. But that's what the storm surge evacuation zones are about, is the storm surge. If you live outside of a surge zone, should you evacuate? You got to think about that. Do I live in a dwelling that may not take that 130 mile an hour wind that's coming? Or do I live in a place that's got a lot of pine trees in particular all around me where I might be blocked off? Because no matter what happens after all these storms, those trees come down, there's a lot of debris to work through, and so any type of emergency response that might have to happen is going to be slowed down significantly until we can get roads open to get to folks. So the best answer is, if you don't need to be here, don't. If you can leave, leave. And what happens then? How do I get back? It was mentioned earlier about we want to make sure it's safe for everybody to come back. All of the jurisdictions along the coast and in the county, we work off the exact same reentry plan. And what will happen is, if you leave the area, and once it's deemed safe, the governor lifts the evacuation order, puts it back in our hands to manage the areas, then we will open up the areas that are deemed safe for people to come back to. If it is so bad that we actually have to put folks out there in traffic control points, then you'll just need to be able to identify yourself as you have property or you live in those particular areas. How you do that? Driver's license, utility bill, something super simple like that. That will get you back home. But also be watching our social media, Ed's information as well. We'll be posting up damage reports all over the place that you can see ahead of time. And there may be some areas that you can get into relatively easily, and some areas it may take weeks or months before you even get back to, especially the closer you are to the ocean. Garden City took a long time to recuperate enough to get people back in after Hugo. Matter of fact, we had to take folks in on military trucks just to get to their property and see what was left. In some cases, it was not there because of the storm surge. So it's a very challenging time, but that's all in place to help folks get back in. So don't worry that you won't get back in. You will get back in. During Florence, we had parts of 501 were flooded, if you recall. And you remember that whole thing that was going on in Conway, where we were almost a whole island here by ourselves because we were cut off to the north, almost to the west, and just about to the south. So those are the issues you got to work with, and those are the things we're working on every single day when this thing is happening. How are we working through all these issues? But once the roads are open and it's safe to come back, absolutely, I would want to get back too, and I recognize that, and I want to make sure everybody gets back to their property as well. So that's how you'll do that. Follow us on social media. Follow the information coming out from WPDE and the others. We'll tell you when it's time to come back. If you did not leave, please do not go out and look around and drive around these areas. Power lines are maybe down, maybe still energized, trees, washouts. You saw a few photos. You just don't know how deep that hole is when it's full of water. And another thing, you may travel these roads every single day and never realize there was a culvert that you went over every single day until it's not there anymore because it got washed out. So think about that. Just don't go through that high water, whatever you do. I know I'm kind of jumping around, but I want to get some other things too. Sheltering. This is very important. If you plan on leaving and go and visit your friends, family, that's great. If you don't have anywhere to go, we do provide sheltering in Horry County. Unfortunately, we can only provide sheltering for Category 1 storms because of the wind speeds. The buildings that we use are schools, and they're schools that are outside the evacuation zones. They're outside of the flood zones. So our number of schools are very limited that we can actually use. And of those, we don't have any data to support any wind speeds above 100 miles per hour for those buildings. They're older buildings. Yes, that's Category 2, but we put the limit on Category 1 because what if that storm intensifies just before it gets here? Once you're in there, we can't get you out. There's nowhere to go. But if you see the forecast is 2, 3, 4, or 5 storm, we still have a means to get you to a shelter. It just will not be in Horry County. And there's a whole plan in place that we work with South Carolina Emergency Management and others to actually bus people out to other locations in the state when that happens. So I hope we never have to do that. I really don't. But it's there if we need to do that. Okay? So that's sheltering. Pets. We do not have pet shelters in Horry County. Shelters themselves do not accept pets except for service animals. We do have the ability on a very limited basis to help folks that are in dire need to have a place to put their pet at the animal care center, but it's very limited. And right now, all the rescues in our center itself are maxed out full as it is, so that'd be even more difficult. But that's why it's important to know what you're going to do with your pet before the storm is even close. Figure it out tomorrow. If you got a pet, what are you going to do with it if you can't take it with you? Just please do not leave it behind. But please do not stay behind just because your pet can't go. That's a very tough call, and I don't want to ever have to make that myself. But that's, your life is worth more. So keep that in mind. So Alan mentioned Emergency Operations Center. It is in Conway at the M.L. Brown building, where the police department and fire department is as well. We are actually getting a new Emergency Operations Center under construction right now, close to where the J. Reuben Long Detention Center is. And the reason why was right before, about 2 weeks before Hurricane Florence was coming, we learned, I had thought the whole time I'd been here that our roof and everything had been upgraded to a Category 5 level storm. We found out that's not the case. So we were facing, at that point in time, what Florence was at its strength of a possible Category 4 in a building that was rated for a Category 1. So we were scrambling ourselves trying to figure out where were we going to go, what were we going to do, trying to work with, get the community figured out what you're going to do, and how are we going to manage this thing. Luckily, Florence did not create that problem, but it was definitely recognized we needed to be at a facility that can be here to make sure we can take care of everybody else that needs to be during these storms and after. So we got to get through this season, and then we'll be in a much better building that can handle over a Category 5 storm, anything coming at us, earthquakes or whatever the case may be. So it's just important for us to be able to, we're the conduit. Everything coming and going comes through Horry County Emergency Operations Center during the event, to the cities, up to the state. It all comes through us. So, and it's all a very well orchestrated, coordinated effort, and that needs to be there when these bad events happen. We need to be there to be able to get us through these events so we can come out the other side in a better place. After the storm, wait for the re-entry news, as we talked about. Go ahead and document your damage, contact your insurance carriers, get that rolling. There'll be a lot of information flow out there about what to do after the storm. But number one thing is make sure you protect your property and that you and your family are safe, and that you can do what you need to do to protect that moving in the next few days when the rain does come back, as it always does, and things like that several days after the storm. Work with licensed professionals. There will be folks that show up to take advantage of all of us when this happens. Everybody's supposed to have a business license now in Horry County, no matter where they are. So make sure to check the credentials of anybody showing up at your doorstep. Hey, you got damage, you want me to come and help you out? Just give me a check up front and we're good to go. And yeah, they're good to go as they're going down the road. Happens every single time. Just be vigilant. Be extra vigilant during these times. There's that be patient, be flexible again. But that's true. It's going to be different, it's going to be tough, it's going to be rough. But we'll make it. I promise you that. Prepare now. Now's the time. Have a backup plan. Inevitably, everything you think is going to work, it won't. If you're going to go to a family member's home, what if you can't get to that location for whatever reason? Have a plan B, plan C. Always watch the weather. Do it every day. Maybe once or twice a day, check it out. Get ahead of everybody else. That's the other biggest tip I can tell you right now. It's two things. We talked about the ice cube. Get in front of what everybody else is doing. Don't wait to go get your items when everybody else is going to go get the items. The stores can't take that. They'll be gone. But then you can take your time, make common sense decisions, not spend money you don't have to spend, not buy things you don't need. You've got time to think it through. So do it now, while there's nothing going on out there for the next, hopefully, 14 days. Perfect time. Hurricane Florence, Ed went over that real well. Did want to bring this up, Tropical Storm Anna. Once again, a lot of damage on the beach from these events. That surge, while it was pounding the sand dunes, that causes a lot of damage. But that's why the sand dunes are there, to help prevent this from going on inland as much as possible. But that's still a lot of damage that takes place that has to be repaired. Hugo, that's just a classic picture of what was going on in Garden City, especially during Hugo. And at this point, Alan, so thank you all. There's so much more we can talk about, but that's enough for now. I think everybody's probably depressed enough. So.
Testing. All right, thank you, Randy. That was tremendous. Now we can take questions. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, you can text 843-995-1421. And I'll step aside, and the two of you, if you'd like to, both of you stand at the podium here and decide yourselves who wants to take which question.
Yeah, it works well. So any questions here? We're happy to entertain any. Yes, sir.
And I missed what you were saying about the water temperature. I couldn't figure out if you were saying if it's colder, the water temperature, that's better, or if it's warmer, it's better.
Okay, good question. So for tropical systems to actually form, the water temperature...
Can you restate the question, please?
Yeah, absolutely. He wanted to know if warmer water temperatures meant better chances for development or hurricanes get stronger. Bottom line, when it comes to water, if water's 80 or higher, that is warm enough for tropical systems to actually form. The warmer it gets, the more high octane the fuel is, so to speak, the more fuel is available for hurricanes. So last year at this time, we were about 86, 87 with the water temperature. This year, we're between 82 and 84. So it's still more than warm enough to support tropical activity. It's just not as high octane as it was last year so far.
If any of you in the audience have a question, if you would raise your hand, we'll bring a mic over to you. Go ahead, Brother Webb.
This question might actually be for you, Alan. How does the church coordinate its cleanup efforts with the county?
Thank you. We do have an active involvement with not just Horry County, but with all the counties within our state. So that, in addition to Horry, that would be Brunswick County, Marion County, Florence County, and Georgetown County. Each of those counties have an independent volunteer organization. This stake is a member of each of those volunteer organizations. Those organizations meet regularly. They aren't just pulled together whenever there's an emergency. There are regular meetings preparing for that date when we are all called together for an emergency situation. Our church, if you've been a member of our church for any time, you are familiar with the call-ups that we have whenever there's an emergency situation. And we will be assigned a particular area to go to assist with that cleanup. Generally, we're not asked to participate in cleanups that immediately affect our area, but we will be asked to go to places like neighboring states, North Carolina, Georgia, areas that have been impacted. Each volunteer organization has their own area of expertise. Our area of expertise tends to fall in the cleanups after a flood, mucking out a house, chainsaw work, getting trees off of roofs and out of yards. And we work very well together with the other volunteer organizations within our region. If you're interested in looking at what you can do to help partner, and for those of our neighbors and friends that are listening that aren't a part of our congregations, we invite you to join us for these volunteer service opportunities to help those in need. And you can learn more about this volunteer effort through www.justserve.org. We invite you to join us when those bad times occur for others. Thank you. Any other questions here in the congregation?
How far inland do the storms hit? I mean, 5 miles, 10 miles? What's kind of the safe distance when the big ones happen?
It really depends on the angle of approach. Most of the storms like the Isaias, I still can't get it right. Isaias and Dorian were what we like to call those coastal runners, if you will, where they're paralleling the coast. And there still can be a lot of rain and wind farther inland as well. Hurricane Hugo is a perfect example that if a hurricane hits the coastline at a certain angle, you can have hurricane conditions all the way to Columbia. Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter had a wind gust of 109 miles per hour, I think, during Hurricane Hugo. Charlotte had 90 mile per hour winds and a tremendous amount of damage. So as Randy said, the farther inland you can go, the better off you are. And you always want to try to remember to evacuate perpendicular to storm motion. You know, if you're evacuating to Raleigh, chances are if a storm is recurving, you might get pretty nasty conditions in Raleigh, more so than perhaps even Myrtle Beach, if the core of that hurricane goes over you. So if it's moving north, go west as best you can.
It's kind of a silly question, but how do they pick the names for the hurricanes?
Randy does that.
Yeah.
There is actually an organization called the World Meteorological Organization, and they meet, there are 6 lists. So the list will repeat every 7 years, if you will. So the list we're using right now in 2021, you'll see again in 2027, I believe. So what they do is they choose names that people are familiar with that speak English, French, and Spanish. That's why some of the names are kind of difficult to speak for Americans, because we may not understand Spanish or French very well. Jorge's and the Eduards of the world, Isaias and all that. Very easy names for Spanish people to pronounce, but not very familiar to people who speak English in America. So they choose the names that people are familiar with most often. How they got Elsa, who knows?
Retire those
Exactly.
bad storms.
Those storms that produce a lot of damage or unfortunately kill a lot of people, they'll actually retire those names and replace it with another. So you will never see Hugo, you'll never see Hazel, and you won't ever see Florence again.
Okay, I was here for Hugo, and in 2018, I don't remember the name of the storm, we packed up and we left, but the community we're living in now is a lot of people that are moving in from up north, and they thought we were crazy for leaving, and they're like, no, we're going to stay. How do you convince somebody to actually leave? Because we live in Webster.
Yeah, I know exactly where that's at, and thank you for leaving. honestly. Because
Got the t-shirt.
yeah. So that is our biggest challenge. And events like this is what helps. We try to get information out. Yes, we have a huge challenge with the growth that's going on all over the place, different challenges of every type. But this is one of the biggest ones we have. Folks who have moved into the area may have never experienced that, and just in your situation, they may look at you like you're crazy, you know, but all you can do is give information the best you can. Unfortunately, if you watch after every one of these storms makes landfall somewhere, you'll always find the reporter interviewing the person who stayed behind, and I've yet to hear one of them say, "That was a great time, I'm going to do that again." You know, it's horrible. It's got to be the most scariest thing ever. But we can talk about it, and talk does not put it into perspective a lot of times. Even pictures don't relate a lot. It's just personal encounters, personal experiences is what we have to use. So we try, and this is a big challenge. And anything we can do as a group, as a community, to advocate these things for us, or you can send them in our direction for information, that's the best thing to do. So.
Randy, don't step away yet. We have a question very similar to that one. In the event that I live in an evacuation area and an evacuation is declared and I decide not to leave, what services will I be cut off from?
That's an excellent question, and you're really taking a chance if you stay behind during these evacuation orders. Number one, it is mandatory. You're supposed to go, and by the law, the governor is order, it has the effect of law. We're not physical, come take you away. We don't have the time, manpower, or anything to do that. But understand, we're working on the premise that there's probably not anybody in that area, for one thing, although probably will be at some point. But when the wind starts getting up, 50, 60 miles an hour sustained, you know, it's hard for police, fire, ambulances to run, to go calls. And it's just too dangerous. When you're in category 1 and higher conditions, that's it. Nobody's going unless it's just some kind of situation that we deem we just have to, because it puts the first responders' lives in jeopardy too. And it happens every single time that someone, when the evacuation order comes out, the storm starts blowing, and then they start calling 911 and say, "I'm ready to go now, come get me." You know, and it's not going to happen. So you really are taking a chance on, if you have a medical emergency or a fire or need law enforcement, it's going to be severely delayed until some point after the storm. So keep that in mind about why you should not stay here if you don't need to.
This is going to sound kind of like a doomsday question, but I'm curious. If there's ever a situation where cell phones don't work anymore, some people have some kind of radios or radios of some kind that maybe they could use to reach out. Is there a list of frequencies that would be useful in that kind of situation?
So we actually have ham radio operators in our emergency operations center, and we have a whole group that does that on all the local emergency operations centers, like in each of the cities, ours, and the state. And it's kind of a whole parallel thing going on over here. They're in the shelters and everything. So I don't know the frequencies off the top of my head.
Sir,
but
where can we find that list?
I can help you here a little bit.
Jump in there.
I've been in contact with the church group in South Carolina, so you'll get my number later, we'll talk.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've got the phone.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question.
Okay, we have an online question. How, especially considering the early storm we just had, how long does it take to evacuate Myrtle Beach in the summertime?
So I'll tell you this. When Elsa was coming, and when we start our planning, I plan for the worst and start backing it down to meet the storm. In other words, at no point in time was Elsa forecast to be a hurricane in Horry County. I was planning for it to be a Category 3 hurricane just because what would that mean for us? And I knew right off the bat, what week is this, y'all? This is 4th of July weeks. This is our worst case scenario for evacuation for a multitude of reasons, but the biggest reason is the pure number of folks that are here. So on any given week outside of this stretch right here, For Zone A, it's about 15 to 19 hours. That's just to get people out of Zone A. For Zone A and B, which always goes together, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 25 hours. And if we have to do A, B, and C, and there's a large number of folks here and everybody's actually moving out, it can take over 36, 37 hours to get that done. That's why you see these evacuation orders come out so far in advance of the storm. Because we need everybody out of harm's way well before those tropical storm force winds arrive at 39 miles per hour. So it's conceivable. When I was looking at Elsa, I was writing in my updates as I was sending out and say, okay, we're at one more day before we got to make the final call on what's going to happen here. Because then we got to get contracts activated, folks moving, people have to move from across the state, from law enforcement, National Guard, start coming. That all has to happen a day before in order to get them here in time to support an evacuation about 2 days out. So it takes a long time. Let's just put it that way.
I live in Conway,
There you go.
and we usually leave for a hurricane, but when we leave, we have our house still here. I want to know at what strength of a hurricane do we need to shutter our windows?
You want that one? Sure.
So normally, at least for me, it's a category 1 or a 2. If you're going to leave your home, a lot of windows are tested in the perfect environment of gradually increasing wind and how that wind impacts the window. What a lot of those wind ratings don't account for is flying debris. So you get limbs that come off a tree and hit a window, that can break it. So traditionally a category 1 or higher. For my house, I typically will wait to a category 2. So
Yeah, it's very dependent upon where you are. As he mentioned, if you're in an area that's more open with less debris potential, that's one thing. But you also get more force of the wind without that stuff there to help break it up too. So it's just really got to play it out, call it out. But anytime 1 or higher, you're good to go.
So, when you have a mandatory evacuation, a lot of people won't leave because they're worried about their property being vandalized. So what assurances can we have that that will not happen? Well, I mean, I know it's a possibility to predict, but does the National Guard come in when there's a mandatory evacuation?
Yes, they do, but I will tell you, I cannot give you one assurance at all. I'm not going to sit here and tell you something that's not going to be real. But I will tell you this, every effort will be made because, there's almost 1,152 square miles in Horry County. And obviously, it's a very good question because people are paying attention to what's going on when people are leaving. So we do step up patrols. We do step up extra manpower. It's impossible to put one on every street corner. It's impossible to put one at every house. That's just the unfortunate reality. But we have caught them in the past, and they haven't been doing it anymore. Those particular people. So, but no, it's a huge problem, and I totally get it. And people are watching that. They absolutely are.
So I know you also have roofs out of here, and of course we know from the previous storm that Conway was just flooded and that was impassable. Has that issue been fixed?
No. So you can get out.
Through lawns too,
Yeah, you can get out fine. You won't have the issues with that flooding there because we want you gone before all that starts. It's the coming back piece. Another tip. Yes, there are evacuation routes that are established, Highway 9, 501, 544, and then down through Garden City out to Georgetown. When the evacuation order is issued, that's the routes that you need to take because that's where the traffic will be moving forward. But if you go before that, go whatever route you want to go. Even if you just went 12 hours before that, 10 hours before that, 6 hours before that, so you pick the route you want to go.
Okay, we have an online question. What's contributed to the increased flooding on the Intracoastal Waterway? Is it heavier rainfall? Is it change of North Carolina water management? Is it loss of wetlands and overbuilding?
So I can tell you this, there's been a lot of work done to understand some of that. And I can tell you that it's not necessarily the water coming from North Carolina. Those dams there are not flood control dams. Those are power generation dams. So they have certain thresholds. They can't do anything with the water once it gets too hot. The loss of wetlands, if 2% of the entire county has been developed, just 2%. I won't say it's not contributing in some form or fashion because common sense prevails, but it's not the major cause of all this. A lot of it is the fact we're getting a lot more rain. I mean, look at all the rain we've got in the last few years versus 5-6 years before. So, you know, there's a lot of contributing factors to it, but I think climatologically is more of it is because we're getting more rain. These storms are producing more rain. The last several hurricanes that we've had, these major ones, have been record setters. So you just can't manage 2 feet of rain, you know? And I know it's a very touchy subject for a lot of folks, but it's a tough situation to be in. I get that. But a lot of it has to do with the climatological part itself. We're just getting more. We're in that cycle.
Yeah. So just to follow up with what Randy's saying about the incredible amount of rainfall, on a globe that's actually been warming, and we won't get into who's causing that because that causes a lot of issues with a lot of people, but we're all supposed to be good stewards of the earth. That's what God commanded us to be, right? But bottom line is that when you have the globe warming, the jet stream slows down. So these storms don't move nearly as fast as they used to. They move much slower. And when you have a slower moving storm, it's going to produce a lot more rainfall. As I mentioned before, Hurricane Florence was moving through our area as a tropical storm at 2 miles per hour. So it took literally 24 hours to get through the county, and the entire time it was putting down a tremendous amount of rain. Matthew was the same way in 2016, moving very, very slowly compared to previous hurricanes. So that's one of the contributing factors. When the earth is warming, the air actually holds more water as well. Warmer air holds more water. Think about that in the wintertime. It can rain all day, you get an inch of rain. You get one thunderstorm in the summertime, and you get 5 inches of rain in less than an hour. So warmer air holds more water, and storms are moving slower. It leads to more flooding rain.
Randy, we have another online question. Are there designated shelters for those who have special medical needs?
Yes, yes, there are. Prior to the storm, there will be a number issued through DHEC that you can sign up for those issues. So, and that is managed by the Department of Health and Environmental Control. They've got that set up. So, and when we're talking about special medical needs, we're talking about folks who need medical care. That may be at home, maybe they're on oxygen, maybe they need some IV therapy or monitoring of that. It's everything else is just basically, if you can work your everyday life and do everything the best that you can, then a regular shelter can work for you. But these other issues are more dire for folks who are not in the hospital, who are not in a nursing home, they're at home, but they need that care, and they have to have a caregiver with them at all times. So that'll go out at that point in time well ahead for people to be able to make that phone call and get set up for that.
And we have a 2-part question. The boundaries for storm surge, is that a recent change for Area B? I thought it was 17 to 17 bypass. And there's a follow-up to that. If you don't live in an evacuation area, are you safe from storm surge?
Second question is easiest. Yes, storm surge is only based upon the areas where the storm surge evacuation zones are. So if you're outside of those zones, you don't have to worry about storm surge. Sometimes if you're in those zones, you don't have to worry about storm surge on every given storm. Every storm is different. So this is a picture of the worst case scenario of all storm scenarios, kind of a snapshot. Every storm will be different. So some areas will be impacted in one area, maybe not the other. But you can't decide that at the last minute. And as I mentioned, we'll be looking to change these and reduce some of these down to a little bit better sense. And I just encourage you, if there's any questions or concerns about the evacuation zones, they're on our website, horrycounty.org, go under the emergency management, and it's all right there. And a lot of this other information is right there for you too. And you can actually go in there, put your address in, and see if you're actually in a storm surge or not, zone or not. So. Okay.
Mr. Randy, is there any special documentation or something that service companies like coastal air and refrigeration, that they need to be able to continue to maybe go against traffic at times of the evacuation, because we're always trying to provide service to those that need it. And is there something we need to have and carry?
Yes. So the best thing to do, you won't have any trouble during the evacuation itself, because they're not, they're just trying to get folks out, and they're not, except for where Highway 501 is reverse lane, and all 4 lanes go out from the other side of Route 22 all the way through Ainer and Marion. Everywhere else there are lanes still coming in. It may be slow or it may be difficult, and you can move around with somewhat ease except for crossing over those. But it's more important after the storm, when you need to get back in to help folks. And all we ask that you have is on your company letterhead, the name of all the essential persons that would need to be in the area working. Have them with a photo ID preferably, and in either uniform or some way identified. That's not necessarily get out of jail free card, so to speak, but it gets you to that checkpoint if there is one, and then it can be assessed at that point. Or if you're in there working and we're coming around looking, see who's in the neighborhood, and you get stopped, there's a reason. Then they can always feed that back to us at the Emergency Operations Center. We can help with that too.
And I have one comment, which may help some folks out here, but anytime we come close to a hurricane or something along these lines, the first thing that goes is fuel.
Yes.
And it becomes a parking lot trying to get in and out of gas stations. And we have 20 vehicles that we have to try and maintain and keep in order and not have to sit in a gas line all day before we can go do service work. So my suggestion to everyone from now until November is keep your vehicle full, even if that means having to fill it up every day. Or certainly if you get down a quarter tank to 3/4 tank, just pull in and top it off, and you won't be one of those that are fighting with everybody else trying to get in line to get gas.
And we have the exact same problem. All of our ambulances, fire trucks, and law enforcement go to the exact same pumps. And we all just experienced that a few weeks ago, if you remember. So, yes, thank you. Good point.
So I know you said that the evacuation in different zones was based on storm surge. I live on the west side of 31, so I'm not in any of those evacuation zones. And normally I'm like the idiot sitting at the window watching the storm go by.
I'm good.
But however, I was here for Hugo, and it wasn't just storm surge. There was like a lot of trees that got knocked down.
Yeah.
So is there ever a time when they would evacuate people beyond that A, B, and C, and how do we know?
No. That's what I mentioned earlier. The only reason we do the mandatory is for the storm surge, but there are other factors you need to take into consideration, just like you said. Right. Yeah, if you live in an area full of pine trees, I would not stick around at all. Exactly.
We'll have a last question here.
I have a disabled mother that is relying on oxygen, and for us, we can leave, but there's no way she could ride anyway to go anywhere. Where would we find out about where to take her or have for transport?
So if we have a storm that pops up again this year, be looking for the number to come out for the registration for the DHEC place to handle that, and they'll work all that for you. But they do require a caregiver to stay with them. So remember that. Yeah. And that includes transport.
Before Alan closes down, I wanted to make one small statement here. Randy would never admit to this, but there are some of the very best in the business that work with Randy. Randy has been recognized by the National Hurricane Center for the work that they do here in Horry County. So you're in incredibly good hands when it comes to preparation for hurricanes in our area. You can rest assured that anything that's being done in this county has a seal of approval from the National Hurricane Center. I went to a National Hurricane Center conference, and he was a rock star. Everybody was like, oh, you know Randy. So these guys really know what they're doing. Take what they say seriously. I can promise you they'll get you through the storm safely. Just listen to what they have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a seat, gentlemen. Thank you so much. I had one last question that came in, and as an attorney, I think I can answer this one. It was about insurance. Can insurance help if you have damage or property damage or as a result of a named storm? And absolutely, the answer is yes. However, your policy must be in good standing. So I deal with these questions in my profession all the time. Named storm comes along, homeowner has let their policy, their wind and hail policy lapse for some reason, and they can't get it reinstated because there is a named storm headed our way. So please be vigilant. When you live along the coast like we do, make sure your policies are ready to go. We have a question from Brother Stalvey in the back.
Not a question, I'm an insurance agent. Even with Elsa, as small as it was, or water not as dangerous, 5 days out they cut off all insurance.
Okay. For those that can't hear that online,
You were done.
Brother Stalvey tells us 5 days out from Elsa, before it hit our area, Brother Stalvey, is that right?
Yeah.
The opportunity to reinstate or obtain a policy of insurance was cut off. So just be vigilant. Make sure your policies are in full force and effect, particularly during hurricane season. Well, I really want to thank our special guests here tonight. This has been a tremendously informative and helpful program. So thank you, Randy. Thank you, Ed. We really do have the best here behind me, taking care of us, warning us in advance, and then when the storm hits, directing the activities. I was a few years ago collecting some information for genealogy from a cemetery in Pawleys Island, and it's a very old cemetery, and I got into this area where there were multiple members of families who died the same day. And I came later to find out that these dozens and dozens of people had died in a hurricane. Of course, they had no advance warning, Ed. They just knew when the storm hit that they had a heck of a storm to deal with. And it obviously just devastated the area. We are very fortunate that today we have advance warning. It's up to us to prepare for those warnings and to heed those warnings when they come. And when we do so, we will be blessed. I want to thank several folks that were very important to this forum today, in addition to our speakers. Sister Paula Mosley, our State Communications Director, who got the word out about this meeting. Brother Josh Benson for our very capable IT support. And last but not least, President Rodney Brown, who this meeting was his brainchild, and he worked with us every step along the way to make sure that it was effective, informative, and helpful. With that, I would like to invite our state president, President Jennings, forward for a few closing remarks. Following that, we will ask Sister Paula Mosley to offer our benediction.
Well, brothers and sisters, my remarks will definitely be brief. I am not an expert on hurricanes, and I will not pretend to be. And we're so grateful to have Ed Pietrowski and Randy here with us today, and it's been just a remarkable experience, and thank you for your time today. I know it's a weekend for you guys as well, and the fact that you were willing to take your time and to do this really, really means a lot to us. Just a couple of quick things I wanted to say. My mom was a school teacher, and there was a couple of hurricanes, I want to say maybe Bob or Floyd, if those sound familiar to anybody. We evacuated to her school, and we were able to use her classroom. And I remember walking out into the hallway, and there were families lined up all along the halls in sleeping bags just packed tightly together. And I would say for all of us that have the means to evacuate, I would strongly urge you and recommend you to evacuate so that those shelters can be left for those in the community that really need to use them. They get filled up and they're a lifesaver. My mom used to always tell me growing up, and I believe this is a quote by Benjamin Franklin, that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Have you ever heard that before? If you have not, and they said it better than I did, but I just had a thought that if you have not lived here a long time, do not be fooled thinking that you have seen a powerful hurricane. My dad told me stories, I think he was 7 or 8 when Hurricane Hazel came through, and how he was looking out the window before they left and just how the wind was going and how scared he was. And I remember being 7 or 8 years old when Hurricane Hugo came through here and watching my dad run to and from the car before we were about to evacuate with pine cones coming down like missiles and the trees just going back and forth. And then waking up later that night with it literally sounding like a train was going at full blast right outside the house and just being totally disoriented and terrified. I totally would support what they said. We have not experienced a major hurricane since Hurricane Hugo. And by the way, I was in Florence, and we had 2 or 3 pine trees, big pine trees, fall on the property that we were at my uncle's house. So, you know, you can go pretty far inland and still have devastation depending on, you know, the caliber of the storm. The one blessing we have is that nothing should be a secret, right? With the technology that we have today and with men like these up here on the stand, we should know exactly what's going on and we should be prepared. And there should be no surprises. The time to prepare and the time to plan is now, not when the shelves at our local grocery stores are empty and people have entered into a panic mode. We have been taught from the scriptures that if ye are prepared, ye shall not fear. I find great comfort in these words. And I just want to share from the New Testament, the book of Matthew, chapter 25. We learn about the 10 virgins. And it says, Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins, which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. And 5 of them were wise, and 5 were foolish. They that were foolish took their lamps, and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said unto the wise, Give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out. But the wise answered, saying, Not so, lest there be not enough for us and you. But go ye rather to them that sell, and buy for yourselves. So brothers and sisters, this doctrine and these principles that are being taught today are not only temporal, but they are spiritual in nature. If we are prepared, we shall not fear. I invite us to get our house in order, whether that be preparing for a hurricane or, you know, whatever trials and storms of life await us, no pun intended. Because if the waters are calm right now in our lives, most assuredly they will get choppy soon enough. And so specifically speaking for hurricanes tonight, I invite us to follow the counsel of these wise men and to be prepared. And then when the orders are given us, look not to backbite, look not to question, look not to think that you are smarter than those that are speaking to you, but to take their advice and to do everything they ask you to. Worst case scenario, you overreacted. No big deal. Right? So that's my counsel to you. Brothers and sisters, I love you. Again, Ed and Randy, thank you so much. We're so grateful. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
Our most kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we are so thankful for this forum, for Ed and Randy to take their time, and for the wise counsel that was given. We are grateful for the inspiration of this evening, and we pray that the words spoken and the impressions given can settle in our hearts and our minds, that we can be good stewards of our community and help our neighbors as we need. We also pray that that would be with our first responders, those that help us, that in the coming months that we can pay heed and be helpful where we need. We pray that that would be with us as we go our separate ways this evening, that we can be kept safe and mindful of those around us. And we ask this in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
so much. Great job.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Oh, anytime. We really do enjoy it. Oh, it was a great forum. They had a lot of great questions. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Alan, you didn't read my question.
I'm sorry.
It was a good one, though.
Yes, it was.
Somebody around the front. Any way we can get